A famous race car driver once said that if everything seems under control, you are not going fast enough. In a world where the pandemic has compressed years' worth of digital transformation efforts into months, enterprises are finding that their need for speed and control can be fueled by the cloud. Besides increased agility and flexibility, migrating to the cloud has unlocked new revenue streams and optimized internal resources like never before. In an Accenture global survey of around 4,000 global businesses and IT leaders, nearly 65% of respondents reported an average cost savings of up to 10%, and that's just one of the many possibilities. Migrating to cloud-based operations have helped these companies not just survive a global disruption, but thrive in the midst of it. We are now in an age where cloud-based solutions are no longer a one-time fix, but a thorough and ongoing restructuring of the organization. Cloud Continuum is a continuously evolving operating model for innovation, and today we explore what this migration holds for the world's organizations. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and in our virtual panel titled Cloud Continuum Imperatives for Businesses, presented by Accenture and Mint, I will be speaking with leading voices across industry and academia to enable you to get a 360-degree view on Cloud Continuum and its impact on the business of today and tomorrow. Let me introduce our speakers, starting with Anand Agarwal, CFO at homegrown fashion retailer V-Mart Retail, Sudeep Srivastav, co-founder and director at app development leader App Inventive, Professor Arpan Kumar Kar from the Department of Management Studies at IIT Delhi, and he is an expert in the area of data science, digital transformation, internet ecosystems, social media, and ICT-based public policy. And finally, Ajoy Menon, Managing Director and Cloud First Lead for the Advanced Technology Centers in India at Accenture. Thank you everyone for joining us for this talk. Let's start with you, Ajay. Considering your vast experience of over 2 decades in the IT services space, and of course being a pioneer in leading cloud transformation for enterprises, what's your definition of a cloud continuum, since the cloud is now being viewed as an enabler of business reinvention?
Gautam, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this panel. Right now, let me try to do it as succinctly as I can do it, because as you probably read the report, it will probably take me half an hour to talk through all of it, right? So first of all, Cloud Continuum, as you rightly said, unlocks a whole set of opportunities for organization. Basically, we believe it's a bridge from their vision to realizing that particular vision. Now, with the pandemic, just to put it in perspective, cloud is not new. It's been around for almost a decade, or so. But with the pandemic, what was really a good to have now it became really an organizational mandate, right? And with that, a massive transition is underway. There's every organization out there is doing a cloud migration in some form or measure, or really using the cloud, right? We talked to, as you know, 4,000 customers, CXOs, 50% of them not from IT, about 16 industries and about 25 countries, 1,000 of them really being in the Asia Pacific region, right? And we found some very interesting things. One is that we found that, about 1/3 or 30% of the workloads, as they call it, the cloud point of view, has actually already shifted to the cloud. And we believe that 2/3 of the workloads will happen over the next 3 to 5 years. But we really believe, and that's what this research is all about, is that this is not a competitive advantage. Moving to the cloud for the sake of cost efficiency is just one part of the story. What drives competitive advantage is that we use the cloud as establishment of a new operating model itself. We don't view the cloud as just a static destination, to move your workloads there. But can you reimagine your entire business operating model, new processes, people, tools, and technologies? And we also believe that the organizations that actually view it in that manner are the ones that really are committed to reinvention. Now, let me just explain it a little further. We actually had this discussion multiple times that what's really cloud? If you ask that question to many of us, even working in IT, would probably say cloud is about public cloud, right? But we said from going forward, we'll define cloud as cloud continuum. And that really means that cloud is a dynamic set of capabilities, or continuum of capabilities, starting from private clouds, public cloud, the edge, and many things in between, right? All connected through the cloud first networks like 5G, etc. Now, what it does for an organization is that, like, they don't see this in silos. They use each of these capabilities to meet a specific business requirements. So, for example, if you require compliances and you require security, then you probably look at your own private cloud. If you really want high degree of latency, you look at exploiting examples of edge. And if you really want scale, you probably look at the public cloud, right? And you don't really, in an organization, you build foundational cloud technologies or, building blocks that works in any of the direction that you take. And you probably have organizations using a mix of these things, right? And the last part of it, which is actually very critical, is that we even went further and we said that there's about 13% of organizations out of the one that we researched, we really are wedded to this concept of using cloud as a competitive advantage, right? And before the pandemic, if you actually looked at any of the industries and said, what's the difference between the revenue growth between the leaders and the rest, you'll probably say 2x. In case of actually this survey, we figured out that post-pandemic and the cloud impact, actually the difference is really 5x. Right? And if you further drill down in places like Asia Pac, which doesn't really have the history of legacy like many of the Western nations, actually the difference is really 14x, right? So that gives you a real sense of the importance of the technology and embracing it just not from a cost and efficiency standpoint, but using it as a tool for reinvention, actually really creating it as a hub of innovation. That in essence is the cloud continuum concept and all the research report about.
Absolutely. And 14x, that statistic should give a pause for thought for anyone listening into this conversation. And you're right, data is now weaving through the fabric of the enterprise. And the use case emerging is to use it as a competitive advantage rather than just the cost saving aspects of it. Of course, many moving parts, and that brings us to integration. So let me hear a leading industry voice on that specific topic within the cloud, which is integration. And especially in the retail space, such a complex value chain, it'll be interesting to hear how things work there. So Anand, let me bring you in. As I said, integration, the retail space that boasts of a complex value chain with true benefits being unlocked when the right technologies are used across the supply chain. We heard some statistics from Ajoy on that as well. So let's hear more from you about the value enablers that integration provides, especially for a space that is undergoing such a rapid cloud transformation. From V-Mart Retail's experience, how can enterprises effectively leverage the cloud continuum across a complex value chain to scale up, especially as, say, demand post-pandemic comes rushing back?
Thank you, Gautam. And I couldn't agree with Ajoy more. I personally come from a background of, while I'm a CA and a CFO for V-Mart, but I personally come from a background of technology, having set up India's first internet service provider business back in '99. And I firmly believe, and at that time as well, I believed that the future is going to be cloud, because at that point of time, the cloud was not known as cloud. It was known probably as a bulletin board service or a FTP, or we've had many names post that. But I think the potential of internet and therefore the cloud, because the internet itself is actually a form of cloud itself, and all the technologies that we have built over the years, right from ARPANET to now, and to the the metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg is also talking about, is all encompassing the wide spectrum of cloud leveraging. Now, as far as retail is concerned, while again, it's not about what retail has been using, but more about what all of us actually have been using subconsciously, which we do not even know is actually termed as cloud. So in our personal lives as well, a lot of mobile computing that we do actually is happening on the cloud. A lot of retail that we currently buy, what products that we buy, are actually traversing through so much of cloud-based infrastructure that even the customer does not know that's actually coming from where and going where. But having said that, I think in terms of the pandemic and the post facto, analysis of what pandemic has taught us, I think the only, thing that we have learned is that change is the only constant, and the fittest are going to survive. The entire concept of cloud continuum, whether it is infra as a service or platform as a service or software as a service, is built around the theory of continuity and 24/7 access with no disruptions. Whether it is through a public or a private cloud or a hybrid structure, obviously providing a significant efficiency kick up due to multiple factors at play. Now, from a retail perspective, I think we've already adopted a lot of technologies which are already based on cloud. And as I speak, I think there are so many new things that we are still wishing and wanting to imbibe. But first, if I were to give a very small example of what has already happened, I think the entire retail chain is already connected. There is a real-time information flowing, which is all facilitated through active data transfers and real-time connectivity, obviously connected through cloud, and which is then leveraging artificial intelligence-based replenishment systems, which is keeping these stores alive and making sure that the consumers get what they want in almost near to real time. Now, that's a very significant change from what we used to see probably 5 years back or 6 years back, where a lot of these calculations, a lot of these anticipations needed forecasting techniques. And that again required a different set of technology or a different set of specialization. But the biggest change which has happened in the entire retail industry is around just-in-time availability. And to a very, very large extent, that has been facilitated only because of the connectivity which has been provided through the cloud infrastructure.
Absolutely. Just in time and also just in case. It has expanded the possibility. And I guess you could also say that, considering you earlier used to be an alumni of HT Media looking after the education initiative, somewhere it's a hyper competitive space. So you got a sort of a grounding in terms of using the power of technology to kind of build a business from scratch and of course grow from there on. Always good to have you with us, Anand. But a good point, just in time, just in case, new possibilities open up. Let's get in the academic perspective on this. Professor Kar, we often hear of data as the new oil and big data as the backbone of business. Now, a lot of large organizations, they capture humongous amounts of data from across functions, but many may not really be converting this data into information or insights. Now, since you've been closely observing the field of data science and data insights, what's your view on the best ways to make data churn out more valuable insights, and how can the cloud play a role beyond just being a storehouse of data?
Thank you. Thank you for this excellent question. I'll bring in a slightly different perspective. When you talk of analytics or AI and all these capabilities which it offers, just like it was mentioned that cloud has been there for over a decade now, and also AI has been there for about 2-3 decades now. Now, if you look at the space of analytics or the data science or the big data kind of things which have been there and evolving, the first era of analytics started about 50 years back, but the commercialization element of it started some, post 1990s, when we started moving into a little bit of predictive analytics with use cases like Walmart and so on. And then post 2005, with the second phase of EIP coming in, it has been more of predictive and prescriptive analytics coming into the picture. But still, at that point of time, cognitive sciences or big data was not in vogue. What happened post 2010 was that big data became more and more important. The importance of big data was realized. And that is where basically organizations started realizing that even the enterprise system could capture big data, and you had different systems like social CRMs coming into the picture. Now, where does it leave the organizations? See, even organizations have something that is called as a diffusion of innovation. What I mean by diffusion of innovation is that within organizations, there will be some organizations which will be early adopters. There will be some organizations which will be early majority. Some would be laggards in terms of adopting technology. Now, what the cloud presents is basically an opportunity. If you look at early adopters, they would be organizations who would be able to configure, change a technology so that they could use it to the best of their abilities. But with cloud, they don't really need to do that. It's beyond that, just that you need to have the big data or the data asset stored in the cloud. They could actually use the different models of business, which is enabled through cloud models like software as a service and all this different, data as a service, all these things that's coming in. So what does it really mean to organizations? It means that organizations can now have the ability to align themselves with the technology a lot more robust manner, in a lot more robust manner than was previously envisaged. So what it leads to that today, if an organization needed to use high tech, especially cognitive science, cognitive technologies and all that, then they would have to implement the technology at their end on premise and then use it. But now with the compute coming into the cloud, the processes, the technologies, everything coming into the cloud, what is possible is the organization just consumes the output, the data, the visualization, everything that is coming out of the cognitive science space as a service. And that is very revolutionizing because they don't need to undergo too much of drastic change within a short time that a cloud is actually ready for implementation. They just need to consume it as a service and align the key business processes with that of the technological intervention that they're bringing in.
That's a great point. I mean, it's not like it's a retrofit, but it's a harmonious evolution of technologies and processes in service of the customer, and in that process you emerge with new business models as well, and operating models as they go across. But speaking of operating models, Sudeep, let me bring you in. What are the best practices to choose the right kind of cloud adoption models to achieve better outcomes, say when it comes to UX? And from App Inventive's relatively short journey of around 6 years in becoming a leader in the product development industry, what are some of the lessons that you could share on how organizations can create better experiences and make cloud adoption and digital transformation more convenient and seamless for employees as well as customers?
Sure. Thanks, Gautam, for having me in the panel. So as to choosing the model, as Ajoy mentioned, you have to understand the priorities and the objectives of the businesses. So if you clearly understand the priorities and objectives, then you can choose the right model for yourself. So for example, if you're ready to invest a lot of energy and time and in technology, you may go with infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service. But if you do not want to go in that direction, you want cloud to handle everything, then you can go with a SaaS model where they provide software as a service. Also, if you want to have your data if your data is very sensitive and you want to have a private network and data is most important thing for you, then you can go for a private cloud. But if the cost is more important and data is not so sensitive, then you can go on public cloud. And similarly, if you can have a hybrid approach where you can separate the sensitive and non-sensitive data, then you can go on a hybrid approach. So understanding the organization's priorities and also the objectives that they want to achieve is very important in choosing the right model. Similarly, not just as a data storage, as Ajoy mentioned, you can use it as a competitive advantage. Now, how you can use it as a competitive advantage is you need to understand that there are two types of customers that you have to cater to when you are moving to cloud. First, the internal customers, i.e. employees, and the second is the external customer, the customers who are actually using the applications. Now, for the internal customer, when you are moving from your legacy system to a cloud system, there are a lot of new things that they can learn. And any good employee, any good person that want to be active in their domain, they want to always learn new things. So when you move from legacy system to that system, where in the legacy system, the job is to keep the ship running, not the new innovation and new optimization that needs to be done. While when you move to the cloud, a lot of things are automated, and when things are automated, you have time for new innovation, new things that can be delivered to the customer, the actual customer who are using the application, which in turn is helping the customers as well, because now there are new things, features, functionalities that are getting to them. It is getting faster to them because of the cloud and automated system that it presents and capabilities that it has. They are using the applications and the websites more efficient manner. So it is helping them as well. So both the customers, the internal customer and the external customer, are getting benefited out of it. Also, it gives you a competitive advantage because you are able to produce features, functionalities, and new things in your product, in your platforms very fast, very efficient manner. So it is giving you a competitive advantage, because if the competitor is launching before you, then the people will go there and they will switch from your platform to other platforms. So it is giving you a competitive edge. And that's why it is very important to switch at this time from a legacy system to a cloud-based system and understand the objectives and priorities of your organization.
Absolutely. Cloud enabling agility, which in turn enables innovation and helps you bring more attractive products to the market at a faster tick. That's just one of the use cases there. But speaking of use cases, circling back to you, Ajay, what are the biggest advantages that businesses gain from migrating their existing workloads into the cloud continuum? With Accenture being a pioneer in this field, could you expand on how Accenture Cloud First and Cloud Continuum enables organizations to go where they need to be in terms of realizing their potential?
Sure. I think, if you really, I guess Anand was alluding to it, but almost everything, every industry that we have has really changed the bedrock of, say, cloud, right? Media, your industry, Gautam, is, huge change over the last 7-8 years, and not necessarily for any other reason except new revenue models, all that, right? So fundamentally, whether we are there to help organizations or not, the most important thing is that consumers have changed, hence all this is happening, right? And the report talks about a lot of use cases, but my personal favorite is Starbucks, because it's a brand that everybody associates with, and I've seen the journey over a period of time. So it's not that they were, again, if you go back historically, they actually had the ability to have a loyalty program much earlier than many people, right? You walked into a store, you were able to make payments using Wi-Fi, contactless payments, all that they had in place, right? But I think what's changed fundamentally is some of the points that we heard earlier in the discussion. Today, they're using that as a strategic tool, which means that, you have facial recognition, you have personalized menus, you have, IoT devices connected to the coffee machine, right? But look at the human side of it. It allows the individual who used to make coffee with you to engage in a conversation with you as well, right? Which is a very big part of why you want to have coffee as well, right? Now, and there are many other, I think it's about 130 million users just using their loyalty program with personalized menus, and more than 30,000 stores having it. It's a great example of not something that's happened just now, but a constant commitment to make innovation happen, right? That's been right through. And to the point that Sudeep was making, a huge emphasis on customer experience, right? What do you really want to do with the customer? So that's where Cloud First and Accenture steps in. We are here for, not just for organizations who are born on the cloud in the sense we don't have a history, etc., but organizations with big brands, big, names that we know over a period of time to make the transition to the cloud. Not in just sense of the cost efficiency part, but a completely new operating model and a new business that they can operate in.
Absolutely. And I think the Starbucks loyalty program is so popular. Starbucks would actually be a bank considering the amount of financial transactions it goes through.
There you go.
So there you see a potential new model emerging for a company if they get that customer experience right, using technology to make that interaction between the enterprise and the customer a bit more intuitive. Great point there, Ajay. Let me come to Anand, to expand on the fact that the pandemic did act as a perfect trigger for companies to quickly migrate to the cloud from legacy systems to ensure business continuity. Now, the retail industry has seen the biggest of transformation, something we discussed earlier. So what changes specifically did you observe in the industry which got your attention, and the positive impact that it enabled? And also, do you think some of these changes are here to stay?
Yes, absolutely, Gautam. I think the changes that we have seen in the last 1.5 years are almost permanent changes. And while nothing would be permanent, I think they are evolving. But definitely, the way we have now learned to live or live virtually in a lot of senses is definitely a step which is going to remain very firmly adopted, not just by industry, but I think across the population. But having said that, I must also say that a large driver for this, while apart from the pandemic, also has been the growth in the infrastructure. And if you look at countries like ours, which traditionally had been low on a lot of infrastructure, if you look at roads or bridges and things like that, but surprisingly and very fortunately, we have taken a leapfrog on the technology infrastructure getting built. And 5 years back, the per capita, let's say, bandwidth consumption, internet consumption was at a X level, and today it would be probably at a 50X level. Now that's a huge jump. And also, if you compare that to the cost per GB that a user in India pays versus what the rest of the developed world pays, it's a huge difference and definitely a much bigger enabler. Now, from that perspective, and if you just add in the fact that the hardware to support all of this cloud, aspirations is also getting cheaper, not only from a capex point of view, but more from an affordability point of view, it is getting far in reach for a lot of smaller companies than it earlier was. So thereby, the case is, the cloud thought process has been where companies like AWS, Amazon, or the Googles of the world have been creating infrastructure and asking people not to spend on capex, but focus on growth and let the capex become an opex and change the operating paradigm. And that is where I feel the big change is going to really take off. The small sector, while Ajay talked about Starbucks, but what now prevents a very small tea company in India now also to leverage a very similar kind of a CRM, which Starbucks has developed over the last 5 years, is very easy now. And I'm sure, companies like Accenture and a lot of other consultants are going to make this a much bigger success than it already is.
Absolutely, Anand. And you've hit the nail in the head. The fact that the cloud enables a sort of a leveling of the playing field. And that's bringing out an interesting trend as well. When we look at, say, the fintech space and the banking space, we see fintechs kind of reimagining that entire interaction. And now you have large legacy banks trying to catch up and see to it that they can offer that same experience to their customers. Let me bring in Professor Kar at this point. We've seen a lot of new companies entering age-old domains and creating entirely new business models, as I said in the fintech banking interaction. So, in your opinion, does cloud help create a level playing field for challengers and incumbents? And more importantly, do challengers have a bigger advantage due to greater flexibility, or do incumbents have an advantage because they have deeper pockets and industry credibility? What's your thought on this, Professor Kar?
So in this context, I'll play probably a devil's advocate in this, entire ballgame. So when you look at the larger organization, they would have more data. And it's an ecosystem where the rich get richer purely because the data is available. For a smaller player to get that variety of data, to get that wide spectrum of data on which they can implement, complex machine learning algorithms and bring out prediction and bring out analysis, which would be very, very off the charts kind of a thing, is slightly challenging unless they have a partner which is providing them the data. On the other side, if it is a smaller organization, an entrepreneurship venture, typically they are more agile. They're more agile to adapt their way of working to suit that needs of the crowd. So what happens in a cloud environment, you are probably going for an implementation of any project, 80% is packaged and then 20% is configured. Now, when you're configuring those 20%, you would still want to have the best practices in the package part of the 80%. Now, if it's a new organization which is entering the space, they can always build around the best practices in the industry, which that 80% has already brought into the team. Their CapEx becomes really low. The OpEx can scale up as it grows. Now, that is an advantage for the smaller organization, but they need to partner with a larger organization so that they can leverage upon platforms and the economics of the platform. And that is where it becomes, potentially a win-win for both ends of the spectrum. But yes, traditionally, if you look at how cloud has been evolving and how cloud has been providing value, it has always been the practice that cloud is more of a silver bullet for smaller organizations who will be more nimble and more adept to changes.
Absolutely. That's what the brave new world of today is, right? 5, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have explored these possibilities of partnerships emerging. But now that we are operating in a cloud first world, all these partnerships coming up and providing unique possibilities for each party. Another point which Anand mentioned, and I'll bring in Sudeep for this, which is that, since the barriers of entry when access to data have reduced, it also makes the competitive landscape much more interesting, considering we are in a mobile first world. So Sudeep, considering this rapidly expanding universe of applications that consumers now find on their mobiles, from a strategic viewpoint, what are the questions that an enterprise grappling with legacy issues needs to ask when, say, migrating their solutions or systems or products to cater to a mobile first audience?
Mobile phones has two major impacts on us. First impact is on the mindset, because everything is available on our fingertips. Now everyone wants everything immediately. They do not want to wait. So you need to make sure that as an enterprise, are you catering to those needs? So if you're slow in providing updates, if you're slow in fixing issues, if you're slow in doing any new things and any new innovation, the customer will not be sticking to you. So first of all, you need to understand the mindset has shifted, and customer will not stick to you if you are not fast enough. The second impact it has is the customer scale. So if, let's say, if you are having a 5 people in your home, you might have 2 or 3 or 4 laptops, but you must have 5 mobile phones in your home. So scale is different now. Now everyone using a mobile phone, everyone has their own application. Everyone has 3, 4 e-commerce application, 2, 4 food delivery application. Every application everyone will have. So now scale is different. So now if you have your own legacy system, and especially on-premises system, scaling and descaling is a much costlier and much exhaustive job. Because if you let's say if you want to scale, then you have to purchase new physical devices. You have to make sure that you cater to the needs of those physical devices, their security, the talent pool that you might need. And if you want to descale, those physical devices will sit idle. While when you go to a cloud, it is very simple process. With a simple process, you can scale and descale, and also the cost effective, because you do not have to pay for everything. You only have to pay for what you are using. So you have to be very understanding on the fact that customer has changed. Now everyone is demanding everything instantly. They do not want to wait. And also the cost effectiveness of the cloud. So you have to see those things in order to understand when to migrate to the cloud. And answer is right now. And you do not need to wait. You have to move to the cloud right away.
Absolutely. The time is now, considering how cloud has changed that paradigm where everything is now available as a service. Let's move on the talk to understand the culture aspect of this as well. We've spoken about competitive advantage, but when it comes to, weaving that thread of data across the enterprise, the culture aspect also becomes important. And for this, I'll bring in Anand and Sudeep to hear their thoughts on, the advice that they would give to leaders who are looking to infuse Cloud Continuum culture throughout their organization, including the workforce. What would you say to them? Anand, we'll hear you first, and then Sudeep's views.
Gautam, I think first of all, I would want to say that it's not just about the cloud. I think in an organization, and which is a forward-looking organization, one has to be very open to change. And the way I look at technology, and the way I would wish that everybody is adopting new technology. There are a lot of new changes which are happening, and it is actually upon us how we want, whether we want to stay ahead in the game or we just want to survive. So it's no longer a question of just survival. I think it's more a question of growth if really one wants to stay ahead. It's again like Philip Kotler said that you want to be an alpha player or you want to be an adopter. So I think that's where the early stage companies and the late stage companies differ. But I think for better or worse, we have to change. And cloud is something that we will have to get onto. And I think from an industry perspective, every leader has to make it happen. Now, whether it is through definition of the correct destination to reach, or identification of the right technology to adopt, or imbibing innovation in the wider base to accelerate adoption, at the end, providing that leadership commitment to deliver on strategy. I think it is a given that one has to make this happen if one has to survive and not just grow.
All right. As a famous tagline reads, just do it. Sudeep, your thoughts, what would you say to leaders who are looking to infuse cloud continuum culture throughout their organization?
Sure. So as Anand mentioned, we have to change. It is if we want to be alpha players, we have to change. We have to constantly innovate. And when we are moving to the cloud from, let's say, a legacy system, communication plays a very important role. So if you are a leader who wants to change their legacy system to a cloud system, first of all, you need to understand why you need it and what objectives you want to have from this change, and you have to involve your team in this change as well. So if you are just giving orders that we want to change from this system to this system, it is not going to work. You have to involve your team. You have to take their inputs and what challenges they are facing and provide a solution to that. Secondly, if you have a big legacy system, do not wish to change everything instantly. Try a simple thing first. Maybe a small portion of your legacy system, move it to the cloud, understand all the challenges and everything, and then continuously evolve on it. So if you want to change everything at one go, it will create a challenge. Third, you need to have some experts on board. Because if your team is struggling with something, they need to have someone from whom they can ask questions, they can understand what challenges they are facing and provide a solution to that. And the fourth, again, is most important. You have to have environment where failure is acceptable, because you are changing from your legacy system to a new environment. There will be some failures. As long as the effort is in the right direction, as long as they are willing to do the right stuff, you have to provide that environment that failure is acceptable. So I think that is few of the things that you need to take care when you are moving from your legacy system to cloud.
Absolutely. And especially with regards to that fourth point where you say failure is acceptable, the point that, experimentation is now becoming more and more frequent for companies. And the fact that cloud enables that for companies to test and see what works and what doesn't in a sort of a containerized framework, that enables them to make more robust choices. So some key lessons of excellence being shared by our speakers for viewers who are listening in and who want to infuse that culture of continuum, cloud continuum, throughout their organization. Some words of the wise there. But before we wrap up the discussion, I also want to focus on skilling. We talked about the possibilities, but to make it happen, we need people who have the skills to make that happen. So, Professor Kar, I'll come to you. Skilling is another key area that needs work. Now, considering that the industry will need good talent to support this transformation, the next generation of workforce will need to develop skills and competencies relevant for these game-changing technologies. So, in your opinion, what are some of the top skills that you would recommend to a young professional wanting to join the cloud workforce who's watching this discussion?
Okay, so it's a very interesting question. So when you talk of cloud, it's not just few skills which are important. You of course have skills related to maybe the service platform, things like Azure, things like OpenStack, all these things coming in. Of course, beyond this, when you talk of cloud continuum, there are programming skills which are required. So there would be other set of people who would be good in terms of developing applications in Python or JavaScript or Java, who are also part of this ecosystem. But more importantly, what is coming in this era is basically the onslaught of DevOps. Probably when you're talking of harmonizing and integrating the development and operations of projects which are running on SaaS, you would need these kind of skills, which is kind of growing in these times. On top of that, I would say that this is one area that India is probably lacking a little bit as of today, is skills related to core AI, skills related to cybersecurity. Now, when you talk of core AI, I mean that it is not purely in terms of integrating packages which are there in Python and R and demonstrating that these can be used by, showing some random forest package or some neural network package. I mean that they understand what is there inside the package and they can build their own package. And that is where probably a lot of skilling effort needs to be built in the future. One of the interesting, projects that one of my doctoral scholars have been working on, and she heads basically the Capgemini practice for, the delivery side. You would typically expect this skill set to be developed in a professional. But earlier, what used to happen, a person could learn, unlearn, and relearn new skills maybe 3 or 4 times in an entire career, which is spanning 30 years. Now, that is required that 3-4 times would happen within a span of 10 years or 15 years. Now, what is bringing in is basically the skill obsolescence challenge. The skill obsolescence challenge is today, I learned something. By the next 3-4 years, I do not know whether that's going to be relevant anymore. Now, what is important in this era is that one side, you are trying to kind of, I would say, you're trying to use and reuse and exploit the existing skills you have. At the same time, organizations need to provide that bandwidth and space for the employees to upskill and reskill for the future. Normally, what happens in this era is that you're so pressed in terms of time that you are only focusing on skilling yourself for the immediate projects, and you forget to upskill yourself for the projects which might emerge after 10 years or after 5 years. And that is where the challenge is in the skilling perspective, in my humble opinion.
Absolutely. I think for every employee now, they would approach this skill obsolescence challenge by looking at themselves, I guess, as a product manager, where they not just think of their skills in the context of immediate projects, as you mentioned, Professor Kar, but more in where are we going and how do we reach there by skilling ourselves to make sure that it's suitable for that purpose. So very important point there. It's time to get in the last word and expand on that point that Professor Kar mentioned, and I'll bring you in for this, Ajoy. How do you think organizations like Accenture can enable a growth culture for professionals wanting to develop cloud-first capabilities, especially as Professor Kar mentioned, it's a challenge, obsolescence of skilling is a challenge. How do you overcome that?
So I think Professor Kar made some very, very important points. If I have to build on it, I think, first and foremost, I guess, if you just pick up the newspapers, but let me give you something from my industry very clear. We are in midst of a boom, right? There's a technology cycle that really is enabling a huge, huge requirement net, not necessarily just reskilling, but just net people we need to make this transition, right? But I think the important point is what Dr. Kar was mentioning about, which is how do you really, the cloud has skills appearing every single day, right? So the onus really, and you remember organizations like ourselves, like in Accenture, you have two parts. One is we need to be ready for what the client wants, but we also need to cater to the person's own career path. So we are dealing with a millennial workforce, right? Which in Sudeep's word, they want it anytime, every time. I think it's equally true for, your careers. My dad worked in a single organization his entire life and probably never even entertained the thought of changing his job, right? This generation probably doesn't think like that. But what is important is that we give them the power to develop their own talent. So a lot of the training, it doesn't happen in classrooms anyway. 80% of the training actually happens by your self-paced training that you do. While you do your job, you constantly keep working on upskilling yourself on the next wave. So that's the first thing Accenture enables. Just on numbers wise, we spend almost $1 billion in just helping people get there. The second is we enable the technology actually to make that self-paced training happen. Can I get the certification? The third one, which is I think a very, very important part, which I think is kind of lost, the way there are two forces. When we were growing up, it was, is technology an art or a science? You never question the programmers. They're 5 years late in a program. They're special people. Unfortunately, fortunately for the rest of the industry, it's not in that direction at all. So what you see today is technology is becoming ubiquitous. It's also becoming very easy to use. And that leads to a set of capability. Like when I talk about UX, UI, customer experience, we talked about a lot. We need to train our people in creative fields, right? In terms of understanding how human psychology works. How do they really explore a screen? How do they buy, right? Which is not what any technology language course teaches you, right? And I think the point Dr. Kar was really referring to was the fact that many of the AI models or Python programming, what is more important is that which industry does it apply to? Do you really understand the industry that is applicable in, right? Otherwise, it makes no sense at all, right? So these two parts of it, which is creative, liberal arts education, and the fact of industry input is really sadly missing from our curriculum in India, in the colleges traditionally, right? Which is what in Accenture, we're paying a huge amount of emphasis really to really get people trained to work in the cloud, right? So I would actually just summarize by saying that, if you're in Accenture looking for a career in Accenture, expect to take control of your career. You'll have the best learning platforms. You'll have the ability to build your career. We'll give you fantastic opportunities. But more importantly, don't expect just a technology view to it. Expect a business view and a liberal arts view in terms of creativity, in terms of what we do.
Absolutely. It's about the perspective. Change your perspective, and it could bring out, interesting possibilities. Sudeep, I believe you have some words to add to this as well.
I mean, Ajoy, I can share the sentiments with Ajoy because, as he said, the industry is booming right now, and today's generation wants to be continuously challenged. If you are not challenging them every time, then they are getting bored and they are switching their job profile. So you have to create that environment where they are continuously challenged. They are getting new every time. They are getting new skills, learning new skills, and moving on with that. So, as Ajoy mentioned, it is not just important with the skills. You have to make them understand how their skills is changing and impacting the customers. So, if let's say they are learning a skill and they're not seeing a real-time example of how it is impacting to the customer, it is not going to give them any interesting, in any interest on it. So that is something that we need to take care of. And that is how a service-based industry needs to grow. They need to provide proper training. They need to make sure that they invest a lot of time in training, and they have to understand that they do not need to just work for the next project. It needs to be catered to the audience of, let's say, after 2 years, what will come, after 5 years, what will come. And that is how you create a growth culture and you grow rapidly.
Absolutely. I think the word context has gained significance, especially as we talk about whatever we do as an enterprise. Why are we doing it? Answering the why is just as important for an enterprise to grow and service its customers. And as Ajoy mentioned, technology, well, it looks like it's converting science into an art. And as Michelangelo once said, the greatest danger for most of us is not that we aim too high and we miss it, but that it's too low and we reach it. So as we heard today on this special presentation titled Cloud Continuum Imperatives for Business, in these interesting times, it is important to develop a cloud continuum strategy for today and tomorrow, considering the cloud offers enterprises the chance to move from a scarcity mentality where simply cutting costs is the goal to a mindset of abundance where experimentation, innovation, and growth can flourish. And that applies to both the enterprise and the employee, and of course, to the customer as well. I'd like to thank everyone on the panel for joining us on this talk and sharing their insights and lessons. And of course, thank you to our viewers for tuning in. This is Gautam Srinivasan signing off.